joining us right now, and so gracious of you to grace us with your time. County Attorney Rachel Mitchell is with us, Maricopa County Attorney Rachel Mitchell, and we're so excited to have you in studio because I can tell you that between Gatos and myself, we have been following a lot of the stories of, we'll call it teen violence, which I know happens everywhere. Please don't get me wrong, but boy, the East Valley really has been a center of attention for a while now. And we still have a lot of questions about it. And I know that this falls into your purview, if you will. And can you help us understand a little bit about where we are? And a reason I say that is it feels like it's taken a long time to get to where some of these suspects, I'm trying to be nice, Gatos would call them criminals, suspects ever get in front of a judge, ever get into trial. It feels like it's a glacial pace. Is that fair?
Well, yeah, first of all, thank you for having me.
Great having
you. You know, I can certainly understand why it feels like a very long time. I mean, even the time between the case that everybody is aware of, Preston Lord's death, which was, October 28th, and the charges on that was 4 months. In order to investigate the case. But it certainly can seem like a long time when you're waiting for justice for your child or yourself.
I know that you we're still at the we've looked at charges, and I'm curious if I'll ask you the question, and I only know this because you're involved in this a little bit. Okay. Is the death penalty off the table for the Gilbert Goons specifically? The ones involved in Preston Lord's death? Yes.
So as you know, there are 7 people that have been indicted for first-degree murder for the death of Preston Lord. Approximately half of them were juveniles at the time, so legally it's off the table for them.
Okay.
And then the others who were 18, I made the decision not to seek the death penalty. Obviously, ultimately, it would be up to a jury, but to not ask for it.
Do you consult with families with something like that? Do you hear from victims, if you will?
Absolutely. It's a very thorough process. I mean, I have said it before, and it's borne out by how we act. It is the most serious thing that I do. And so, I receive a report and recommendation from very, very senior members of my office that I read thoroughly. That includes input from the victim family, which, obviously is very important. But there are a lot of other factors that I take into account as well. And one of those is really the obvious thing, which is half of the actors are eligible and half of the actors are not eligible. And so do you get a drastically different sentence for somebody because of a birth date? As opposed to you could be looking at somebody who maybe actually was the worst of the actors, but they're 17. And so do you punish the 18-year-old because you were born a few months earlier?
Interesting.
Oh, yeah,
no, that makes sense.
That's a fair consideration, because I was going to ask that. I was going to say, how do you arrive at that decision? What kind of things do you consider? But yeah, you just explained that. I wouldn't have thought of it that way.
Can I ask, and I completely understand. Again, we're talking to Maricopa County Attorney Rachel Mitchell in studio with us right now. I have zero expectation that you would throw law enforcement under the bus. So I say that knowing ahead of time. I think there's a lot of people that have questions about the job the Gilbert Police Department did in maybe identifying to start with, because we know there were incidents prior to the death of Preston Lord, investigating, do I want to call it enthusiasm, thoroughness? Can you understand where there's people in the community that look at what's happened there and question specifically that police department?
Sure. I mean, I've talked to those individuals as I've been out talking to members of the public where they, question it. And, there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, there is a saying, hindsight is 20/20 for a reason. And there are a number of factors that should be looked at. One of the things, though, that I have come across is that there were a lot of bits and pieces out there, but not necessarily whole pictures. And once those whole pictures started coming into, sharp relief, there were some charges filed, as you know, outside of the Preston Lord case itself. And, one of the challenges that we all had on all of these cases was getting people to cooperate and come forward. And also the understanding that just because there's a video posted on Twitter or X does not mean that the case is now solved and prosecutable. You have to have, as you know, somebody who can attest to the accuracy of that video and also fill in context. Because as I've said, people film something that's happening, which means that before that filming started, something was happening. And so we need that context of what was that that caused people to pull out a camera.
And that's, I guess that's a fair argument. And again, I'm not going to try to belabor the point too much. I look at, and for example, we had opportunity to speak to the chief of police at Queen Creek. And there's just a difference in, I don't know if it's just style. You deal with a lot more police departments and law enforcement organization than I do. But we felt like out of Queen Creek, we got openness, we got honesty. We felt there was a level of accountability coming from the police. We could have done this. And when it came to Gilbert, we didn't get hardly any of that. And I don't know if that's just down to style, or is there something more? And that's where we still have questions.
I'm not sure I can speak to that, not having been part of that conversation. Obviously, they started at two very different points. Which one, it started with a homicide, and the other did not. So, I mean, that whether that played a factor, I don't know. But that's certainly something to look at.
Final question, as I beat up on the Gilbert PD. Final question for County Attorney Mitchell. Whose job would it be to investigate a police department if someone thought there was malpractice that had happened, if there was some sort of negligence?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up today, because just this morning I was at a press conference contesting the thought that DOJ would come in and look at Phoenix PDs. That's certainly not the answer. But, keep in mind, police departments answer to city councils or town councils, and those people answer to the voters. And there are also city managers involved. So those are some places that could look at it. You can also have independent consultants come in as well. So there's a multitude of things that you could do.
That's fair. When it comes to youth violence, do you think we've got a handle on it? I keep seeing stories. Do you believe that there's the proper attention or focus on the issue now?
I think there's focus, but what there needs to be is action as well. One of the things that we're seeing in my office is just a proliferation of juveniles with guns. And we actually asked for some legislation this past session that did not make it through the legislature. And it's a quirky little part of the law, but it's a significant part where juveniles are allowed to possess guns under certain circumstances, like for hunting or sports. But they're also allowed to have it in their own homes. What the law does not say, though, is that it has to be with the parents' permission. And
that's a bit of a gap.
Right. Or a loophole, as we like to call it. Yes. And so we asked for that loophole to be closed, and it did not make it through the legislative session. But I plan to take it back, because we have parents who are calling the police saying, please come get my kid's gun.
Wow.
And if we can't even do that, that's, to me, that's foundational. And so, that's certainly one step we can take. There are other steps as well. Certainly, I think there are some legislative changes that can be made and proposed relating to not specifically the Preston Lord death, but these other collateral cases, if you will, to toughen the law up so that we have, more teeth to the law.
She's Maricopa County Attorney General Rachel Mitchell. I hope you can stick around for just a little bit. You touched on it just a minute ago. There was a press conference held earlier today regarding the DOJ report on the Phoenix Police Department. You had some very pointed comments. We're going to have you share some of those, and I got some more questions for you. We just discussed youth violence a little bit, the Preston Lord case, Gilbert Goons, but I did want to lucky we got you today.
Yes.
I just saw you on TV, for goodness sakes. You were at a press conference earlier with one of the police unions, and it was about the DOJ report that came out a few weeks ago, might be a nice way to put it. And hold on one second. Is her mic on real quick? Sorry. Okay. We got it? There.
Yes.
And I know you had some very pointed remarks. I'll let you go. First, I mean, your initial take on the report itself, that was, I think we referred to it as scathing in relation to the Phoenix Police Department.
I agree with that. It was scathing, but unfortunately, what it was also was lacking in details and lacking in context, full set of facts. And just in situations that I was personally familiar with, I saw how it was written up, and I thought, if this is the level of detail that they get into, this is not a fair report.
Okay. All right. Can I ask you a question? Is there anything in the report? I know that you've literally gone over it with a fine-tooth comb. Is there anything in it that's valid? Does it have any valid arguments for the way Phoenix Police Department has gone about things?
What I would say is this. I deal with over 30 police agencies as the county attorney. No agency is perfect. And, when you're dealing with literally thousands upon thousands of call-outs where people are, in many cases, going through a horrible point in their life, they may be addicted to drugs, they may have mental health issues, there are going to be things that happen that are not pretty and they're not handled correctly. But you have to look at the percentage of cases and what is the response to those cases, as opposed to pulling those out and saying this is a pattern of practice. And that's really what the DOJ did, is they went too far. Always there can be more training. Certainly de-escalation training is very important, because ideally you don't get to the shooting scenario in a lot of situations if you properly de-escalate. But you also have to keep in mind, we're dealing with a city that is under siege for fentanyl addiction, with people that have guns that should never have guns because of their felony convictions, who are pointing guns and shooting guns at police. And that's a question that was never asked. Why is that happening?
Well, and I guess along those lines, again, we're speaking with County Attorney Rachel Mitchell, that for one of the years in there, and I apologize, I don't have it in front of me, we led the nation in police shootings, in deaths, officer-related deaths, and in shootings in general. And that was one of the questions where I think, well, what did we do? Was it something that was going on with the populace of Phoenix, or was it something with the police department? You can understand why some people would look at that and go, how do we have more shootings in L.A. or New York?
Well, and we've seen that ebb and flow over the years. I've been a prosecutor now for 32 years, and I can remember a time back when I was working for Rick Romley that we had, a rash of people shooting at the police. So, I think there are some dynamics that are at play here. Obviously, COVID did have a large impact on people's addictions. It had an impact on mental health. We certainly have a fentanyl crisis. Another thing that we lead the country in is this, that of all of the pills of fentanyl that the DEA seized in 22 and 23, over half were seized from here in Arizona.
Wow.
So you can't ignore those factors either.
No, the numbers are what they are.
Yeah.
So then what would you say are the reforms that are necessary, and what does that look like?
Well, what I would say is, if they're going to look at that, first of all, they hired a police chief to come in and make those reforms, and he has made a lot of those reforms. That's Mike Sullivan. And I've talked to Mike Sullivan. He is dogged in his determination to make those reforms. So I think that's a first step. But that was one of the things that I had a problem with about the report. Is they're not looking at the reforms. They're looking at past incidents, and they're not really taking into account but what's been done about that. And so I think if anything, they need to look to what reforms he has made and see if we need to go further or not. Always training is important.
Yes.
Always training is important.
Can I ask you about this consent decree, this thing that's hanging over our heads, I guess you would say? If I understand correctly, it would require the mayor and the city council to agree to it in some way, shape, or form. But you are decidedly against a consent decree. We've had guests on here as well. Tell me what your specific issue is if the city were to enter into a consent decree between the DOJ and the Phoenix Police Department.
Well, to be clear, I'm against DOJ oversight, and the consent decree, if you will, is almost like a plea agreement short of the full oversight that the sheriff's office is going through right now. I do not think that bureaucrats from Washington, D.C., who really don't have law enforcement training, should be sitting back there reading reports, sterile reports telling our Phoenix Police Department how they ought to police. I think it needs to be people with law enforcement experience, boots on the ground, who know this community, who are weighing in on that. I've seen the results of the federal oversight, where they rejected the consent decree in the sheriff's office, and that's cost us so far over $250 million as taxpayers. And
are we any safer because of it? That's the argument,
no,
right?
We're less safe, because what it does is it discourages police from policing.
Yeah, and my guess is maybe makes it even harder to recruit officers.
Yeah, and retain them.
Deputies,
so it's an attrition issue as well. Yes.
We really thank you for your time today.
I
appreciate you addressing these issues, and I know that not only with the DOJ issue, which we're all intimately involved in, we continue to keep an eye on youth violence and wanting to see the Gilbert Goons, I should say this, wanting to see Preston Lord's family, as well as some of the other victims' families out there, see justice.
Absolutely, and we will continue to seek that from the legislature. These are class sixes, and I think when you have multiple people attacking someone else, that we need to look at making that a more serious offense.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, County Attorney Mitchell. Have a wonderful 4th of July.
Thank you. You too. Stay as cool as possible.
Oh, we're going to do our gosh darndest, I'll tell you that.
Thanks for watching Outspoken with Bruce and Gatos. Tap to watch more from KTAR News and click the button in the middle to subscribe.